Well, poop on my butt. It's already time for chapter 2, pony scales. So here we go. -2 Twilight? Spike gasped as he saw Dragon Twilight lying on her bed, staring at him with an alluring gaze. Oh, Spike. You know it's past your bedtime. What? Twilight cooed in a seductive tone. What? It's only been one chapter. This is chapter 2. We didn't... This isn't right. Wait, did we, jump forward in time? You should come to bed with me. I get so cold being all alone in this bed. Twilight, Spike gulped loudly, staring at Twilight as she trailed her claws slowly up her chest and began to lick her fingers. After a few bats of her tongue, she proceeded to slide her fingers back down her chest, across her stomach, and straight down towards her inner thighs, all while staring at Spike with the same alluring gaze. Spike didn't know what came over him as he began to walk towards the bed, his heart beating fast with each step. As he approached, he continued to look at her legs as the hand she slowly began to stroke her own figure. Her fingers moved slowly and delicately over her own scales while passing over some very suggestive areas. Oh, Spike, are you staring at me? Twilight said with a giggle as she turned over on the bed, her backside now facing Spike. You're so naughty, she cooed once more after turning her head to face him while wiggling her rear at him. So much want. Spike could hardly process any sort of mental function anymore as he drew closer. Soon coming to the edge of the bed, he reached out with his hands, open fully and ready to grasp Twilight's tight, round, plush... Spike! Twilight cried, pulling the bucket away as it still dripped with water. Please wake up! Are you okay? Whoa! Spike yelled out after being unceremoniously woken up. With the last actions from his dream still clear in his mind, his arms immediately reacted by lunging forward and grabbing onto whatever was right in front of him. Twilight's chest. Spike? Twilight looked down at Spike's claws as they gripped onto her chest, noticing 2 bulges in that area. Twilight, Spike gasped loudly as he realized where he was grabbing, his body frozen still from shock. After another moment, he quickly retracted his arms to his own body and rolled over. With Twilight no longer in his view, his mind finally began to process his thoughts regularly as he attempted to realize exactly what was going on. That was a dream. All a dream, right? Spike thought to himself. I'm still in the library, and Twilight's still a dragon, so... Well, this is certainly new, Twilight announced. I forgot that the anatomy of female dragons had their breasts up in this area. Interesting. As Spike turned over once more to look, Twilight began to move her hands over and around her chest, closely inspecting the feel and dynamics of her chest mounts. Twilight, your... Spike's nose began to drip with blood, as his whole body began to heat up and sweat profusely. His limbs were now shaking as he watched Twilight Sparkle rub herself firmly on her chest, and apparently enjoy doing it as well. Can you please just stop? Spike cried as he shut his eyes tight and drove his face into the floor, clasping his hands onto the top of his head. Huh? What's wrong, Spike? Twilight asked as she looked down at her trembling assistant. Why are you shaking like that? What's... It was then that Twilight noticed a little bit of blood dripping off of the front of Spike's face. Spike! You're bleeding! Quickly, Twilight got down on her knees and cradled Spike in her arms as she pulled him close to her. Oh my god, this is like total ecchi material. Oh my gosh! Are you hurt? Did you hurt your head on the floor? Twilight, it's you, Spike choked out as best as he could as he raised his face up, now looking into Twilight's eyes. Me? But what did I mean, what happened? How did your nose start bleeding? Why did you faint earlier? You're just... Spike finally let his head flop down, not even caring that his head was now resting in Twilight's breasts, and his mind reached utter mental exhaustion. So hot. I'm... hot? Twilight questioned as she reared her head back, her face clear with confusion. But I don't feel hot. What does... Then Twilight noticed Spike's head gave a soft nuzzle into her chest, and everything hit her like a ton of bricks. In a loud gasp, Twilight realized everything. She was now a dragon, the same species as Spike. Spike had never been around another female dragon, and the only beings around were ponies. Though he did have a crush on Rarity, it was obvious that things between the two couldn't go too far, even if Rarity complied, which was highly unlikely. Thinking back to when she first turned into a dragon to now, she then recalled all the times where she had exposed herself. First with the tail, Twilight thought, passing through all the points that she could think of. Then the mirror, and... oh no, my chest! Twilight then remembered that she had just inspected her own dragon breasts in front of Spike. The equivalent of fondling her own pony breasts in front of a cult. This whole time, Spike had been watching her as he showed off her body, and Spike has been mentally tortured by it, without her even knowing. Twilight's mind reeled at such a scandalous act, and only then had she finally realized what Spike had been going through. "By Celestia!" Twilight stammered, her face flushing red as she looked down at Spike still. "Oh, Spike, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. What do I do?" Again, Twilight's mind worked, checking for the best possible solution, which came quickly. I have to change back to normal, Twilight thought. That's the only way to fix this, and to stop torturing Spike. Oh, the poor guy. I just feel so... dirty. Twilight looked at her assistant one more time before setting him back on the ground. Alright, Spike, she began. I'm going to go through the book and see what we need to reverse a spell, okay? The only response she got was a soft nod with Spike laying face down on the floor, but that was all she needed. Quickly, she moved over to her book and flipped through the pages, searching for the correct counterspell. To her relief, the way to reverse the spell was not by another spell, but instead by a potion, so she didn't need to recruit another unicorn to help her out with it. All she needed were a few ingredients and a bit of her original DNA, and they could complete the potion. Moving swiftly, Twilight searched through her bag once more for her desired ingredients. Tumbler root, goss grass, neem leaf powder, white sage, and then there's... oh no. Twilight rummaged through her bag more, yet couldn't find the last ingredient she needed. She checked the table, and it was none of the few items she already had out. Spike? I think we have a bit of a problem here. What is it? Spike asked aloud, still not raising his head up. I think I'm missing one of the ingredients that's listed here, so I'm gonna have to go back to Zecora's place to get it. Twilight sighed at the realization that she would have to walk all the way through the Everfree Forest again for the third time today. Also, the book gave a bit more information as to the specifics of the ingredient needed. And I may need you to come with me. Huh? Why's that? Spike questioned, finally lifting his head, but careful not to look too low. What a cool guy. The book says I need something called Essence of Dragon as the main ingredient for any potion to turn a transformed dragon back to their original form. Also, it says it's needed fresh, within 2 minutes of being extracted from a dragon before it must be used, or the essence is wasted. What's Essence of Dragon? I've never heard of that before, Spike asked with a raised eyebrow. I'm not sure, but I know Zecora should know. I mean, it is her book after all, Twilight said as she finished packing up the needed supplies and her book into her saddlebags. Whatever the case, I'm now certain that I'll need you with me, so we should really get going, Spike. The sooner we can get this fixed, the better. Right. Fixed, Spike said softly with a sigh. Twilight then walked upstairs and into her room, quickly snagging her hairbrush that still had a few strands of hair on it. Instead of picking a few pieces off, she decided it would be best to bring the whole thing instead of searching for a few strands of hair in her saddlebag. With the last item she needed in her bag, Twilight went downstairs with Spike, who had gotten back up to his feet. You ready to go, Spike? Yeah, let's just get this over with, I guess. Alright, let's get going then. With that, Twilight sat her saddlebag over her shoulder and started towards the door with Spike close behind. Going to Zecora should be easy, Twilight thought. I always take the same route, so I know where I'm going. What could go wrong? Oh, Twilight, you're not supposed to say that. Well, that chapter was rather short, so I think I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 3 as well. Hyphen 3 hyphen. Things are going very wrong, Twilight screamed at the top of her lungs as she and Spike raced as fast as they could through the everfree forest. Behind them was a juvenile Hydra with only 2 heads, yet still as large as a regular-sized Ponyville home, chasing them while roaring out in excitement. How the heck did that Hydra know we were coming? Spike yelled to Twilight in a mixed tone of confusion and fear. I don't know! Twilight screamed in a reply, trying to think of a reason as to how a Hydra could have ambushed them. It must have been waiting for us on the path I usually take. I guess it's because I kept using it over and over today. Snap. Watch it, Twi! Spike yelled as Twilight narrowly avoided one of the Hydra's snapping jaws. Stop thinking and keep running! But I gotta think! Twilight said in her mind as she sped through and over the bushes next to Spike, trying not to lose him in the dense forest. I gotta figure out a way to escape this Hydra! Twilight's mind reeled as she tried to come up with an escape plan, tried to remember any sort of trick to getting the Hydra off of you. She thought of running under it like she had last time at Froggy Bottom Bog, but this Hydra was not nearly big enough for that, and she wouldn't make it under. Snap. What are we gonna do, Twilight? Spike yelled again in desperation as he looked over to her. What are we... Spike was only a few feet ahead of Twilight in the direction they were going, and the angle at which he saw her allowed him to catch a very alluring view of Twilight's chest. Every time Twilight made a footstep, jumped over a bush or a fallen branch, or ducked under one of the Hydra's heads, her breasts bounced and jiggled freely. Spike couldn't help but stare at her, not even paying attention to what was in front of him, and more importantly, what was behind him. His legs passively carried him further and further, yet his eyes would not veer away from Twilight's direction. Spike's cheeks turned to a deep crimson as he bit his lower lip, his mind momentarily drifting away from the deadly scenario they were currently in. Twilight began moving ahead, and Spike caught the perfect side angle as her breasts continued to bounce around before him. Soon, Twilight was pulling ahead more, allowing him to catch a tantalizing and almost teasing angle of her breasts, making him move his head over in a vain attempt to see more. However, it was then that Spike realized that if Twilight was now pulling ahead of him, that meant that... Snap! Whoa! Spike yelled as the latest snap of the Hydra's jaw came just centimeters from his tail, which had somehow began to become erect. Snapped out of his trance, Spike quickly picked up his pace once again and caught up to Twilight, who was still trying to figure out a way out of the mess. However, before she could come up with anything, the two were suddenly met with an abrupt clearing in the forest, followed by flying through the air over a river. Within only a split second, the two had ran out over a large river in the forest and were in midair over it. For a moment, it seemed like Spike and Twilight would make it, but their hopes quickly dropped at an equal rate to their descent, straight into the middle of the river. Spike! Twilight cried as she tried to keep her head above the fast-flowing water. Twilight! I can't swim well! Spike cried back as he too fought against the water. As Twilight attempted to make her way toward Spike, she heard the large splash behind him. Looking back, the Hydra had jumped into the water as well, and was then right behind them once more. Snap! Twilight barely managed to duck under the Hydra's latest grab at it, and continued to desperately try to reach Spike. Though naturally adept in the water, the Hydra was still a juvenile, and water of these speeds were throwing it off left and right, beginning to make it tumble over at times. As the Hydra continued to try and regain its balance, Twilight wasted no energy in making her way toward Spike, and finally grabbing a hold of him with one of her claws. Giving a tight jerk, she pulled him closer and wrapped both arms around him, holding him tight in her arms as the two floated down the river. Twi! Do you hear that? Spike yelled in order to keep his voice heard over the raging water. Water! You mean the Hydra? Twilight replied, looking back briefly while kicking her feet, trying to keep the two afloat. Yes, I'm well aware of it! No, not him. That! Pointing down the river, Spike stared straight at a sudden ending to the river, the trees, and the earth around them. As they drew closer, Twilight could then begin to hear a low rumble at the sound of crashing water. Though in a highly stressful situation, it wasn't hard for her to figure out what those clues meant. And as they reached the point to where the river cut off, her suspicions were swiftly confirmed. A Twilight plus Spike voice. Waterfall. Waterfall! They both cried out in unison as they both turned over to the side and began to freefall down the cliff. The waterfall was about 50 feet or so in height, and Spike and Twilight only used this time to hold each other closer. In a brief moment, they exchanged glances as they knew their lives may be nearing their endpoints. But as they exchanged glances, Spike's face blushed as he realized one of his claws was latched onto one of Twilight's breasts, giving it a soft squeeze before the two hit the water. Oh, splash! Another undefined period of time later. Twilight's eyes strained to open as she had finally found herself coming out of her unconscious state. Her head was spinning and pulsing with the strong pain as she tried to lean up, but eventually managed to gather up the strength and coordination to do so. As she looked up, she could tell that it was now nighttime, the moon now halfway up in the sky with the stars clearly visible. Looking around her, Twilight found that she was just up against the edge of a river. Her still dragonified feet slightly dipped into it. She rubbed her eyes gently with a hand before looking around more, able to make out some bushes, a large quantity of trees, as well as... Spike! She suddenly cried out as she saw her dragon assistant curled up several feet away, not moving. Oh no! Spike! Twilight cried again as she clumsily crawled over to him, her body still not fully woken up. As she drew closer, the little dragon would still not move, and to her didn't even seem to be breathing. Twilight's eyes watered as she came upon him and scooped him up in her arms gently, bringing him into a deep hug. Oh, Spike, Twilight whimpered as a tear began to drip down from her eye. No, this can't be happening, Twilight spoke in a soft voice as tears continued to flow. Twilight proceeded to cry freely as she held her limp dragon assistant in her arms, all of her sorrow pouring out of her all at once. She thought it might be a dream. She wanted it to be a dream, but the aching in the back of her head constantly reminded that this was real. Twilight embraced her assistant fully just then, crying out as loud as she could while holding her arms around him tightly. Spike! No! Please don't leave me! I'm sorry, Spike! Spike! Though no matter how loud Twilight yelled, no matter how hard she cried, nothing seemed to bring Spike back. Not now, and maybe not ever. Until... Twilight? Came a soft whisper from Spike, his eyes still closed with his body still limp. Spike? Twilight gasped as she reared her head back and she looked at Spike's face. You're alive? Twilight, you're... Spike groaned softly, his head swaying from side to side slightly as he seemed to be beginning to regain consciousness. Spike! Twilight exclaimed as more tears, those of joy, began to flow from her eyes. You're okay! You're gonna be okay! Again, Twilight embraced Spike fully, her tears running down her face and to Spike's back. Oh, Spike! I was so worried that... Twilight paused as she felt a claw gripping one of her rear cheeks. Your scales are so soft, Spike mumbled as if he was sleep-talking while his other claw slid over one of Twilight's breasts, giving a squeeze there as well. And you're so warm. Spike's head leaned up lightly as his tongue stuck out. Licking at whatever was there, which happened to be straight onto Twilight's lips. Spike? Twilight gasped as her face flushed red. Are you... Hey, wake up! At this, Twilight began to shake her assistant a bit, trying not to shake him too hard, but every squeeze she got from his claws seemed to urge her to shake harder. Oh, Twilight either feels completely violated right now, or just... I don't even know. I can't even, imagine. That'd be terrible. Huh? Where am I? What? As Spike came to, he suddenly realized the placement of both his claws and where his lips were dangerously close to. As he looked up at Twilight, he was also able to make out the bright blush on her face, which was then only matched by the one that began to grow on his. Both Twilight and Spike turned their heads away, as Spike rearranged the positions of his claws, holding them both now onto Twilight's hips. They both continued to blush, eyes looking around while trying to find something else to talk about. Where are we? Spike finally choked out as he observed his surroundings. I don't know, Twilight replied, looking around a bit more herself. Looking up the river, there was no waterfall anywhere in sight. We seem to have drifted a long way since the waterfall, and It's nighttime, so we could be anywhere by now. The waterfall. Oh, is that Hydra still around? Spike gulped. No, I don't think so. I think it got hit by the waterfall too, and it lost us. Twilight looked around more, hoping not to be proven wrong. I think we're safe now. I just hope we can find a way out of this forest. As Twilight looked around, she got a strange feeling that something was missing. She looked down at Spike, who was also surveying their surroundings, and then back at the water. Then it hit her. Oh no! My saddlebags! Twilight yelled out suddenly. I lost my saddlebags! With the book and all the ingredients inside! Twilight got off of the ground and released Spike from her arms as she ran towards the water's edge, scanning the immediate area for any sign of her bags. Unfortunately, they were nowhere to be seen. Twilight fell to her knees, feeling helpless now without any supplies and without her magic to help her. What are we going to do now? She thought to herself as she gave a deep sigh. Twilight? Spike asked as he came up beside her. How are we going to get out of the forest? It's really creepy at night. Well, even more creepy. I don't know, Spike, but I think that it'd be wise to wander around I don't think that it would be wise to wander around the forest at night, Twilight said as she began to look around some more. We should try to find some shelter to stay in until the morning. You mean like that? Spike said as he pointed off towards the forest. Turning around, Twilight saw him pointing towards a barely visible opening in the side of a steep hill protruding from above the treetops, looking to be a cave. I bet there's a dragon inside that cave. That should work, Twilight said. I just hope there isn't anything currently occupying that cave. She gulped at the possibility of things that could be holding up in that cave, and how angry they would be to have two dragons suddenly crash in there with it for the night. However, the two currently had no other option, and proceeded to walk through the forest after one last check of the river for Twilight's saddlebags. After only a few minutes, and without interruption, the two made it to the cave's entrance. Once inside, they were relieved to find out that the inside was not occupied, and also had patches of very small mushrooms on the ground and lining parts of the walls. Feeling the mushroom patches, Twilight determined that these might be good areas to rest for the night, and proceeded to lay down on one of them. Spike quickly followed suit, curling up on a nearby patch of mushrooms and wrapping his tail around himself. Hey, Spike? Twilight whispered softly, her body shifting around some. Yeah, Twi? Spike asked, able to hear Twilight shifting around and then suddenly feel her arms wrap around him. What? I'm sorry I brought you into all of this, she said with a tear building up in her eye. It's all my fault. Just everything. Oh, it's okay, Twi. Really, it's been a really weird day, Spike said, accepting Twilight's embrace and sliding his own arms around her. I think it's going to be pretty hard to sleep outside, though, even if we are in a cave. Don't worry, Spike, Twilight assured. Just try to drift off to some sort of happy place. A dreamland where all your wonders and fears just whisk away, and you can simply lay back and enjoy... not that kind of happy place, Twilight said with a bit of a blush as she pulled one of Spike's hands off of her rear. Oh. Sorry. Spike's such a cool guy. Man. All these stories that I read that have Spike in them, he's just been so awesome. I can totally relate to the guy. He's a cool guy. I like him. I think my favorite fandom character is Spike now, because he's a cool guy.